Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Nadia Ben Youssef, and I am the Advocacy Director at the Center for Constitutional Rights. On behalf of the US Human Rights Network, UPR Task Force, and the working groups on the criminal legal system, police violence, and the people of African descent, I welcome you. Thank you to the participating missions, to our colleagues at Amnesty International for extending invitation, and to Nicholas Aramayo of the ACLU for arranging this important event. I am especially honored by the presence of friends, colleagues, and comrades who will be offering testimony. We are here to invite international vigilance to the structures of oppression in our country that marginalize and criminalize people of African descent, violating both their human rights as well as their civil rights under the US Constitution. In this critical period of mass uprising and global reckoning with systemic anti-Black racism, and in the context of the International Decade of People of African Descent, we believe it is the obligation of the international community to explicitly name the ways in which the US's criminal legal system is designed to disproportionately harm Black people, and particularly those Black people who exist at the intersections of marginalization and criminalization, including Black people with disabilities, Black women, Black people with marginalized genders, Black people living in poverty, Black sex workers and people in street economies, and Black youth. The structure of our event offers insight into 4 particular aspects of what we deem to be a fundamentally racist criminal legal system: police violence, cruel and excessive sentencing, conditions of confinement, and political prisoners. Our political commitment is to follow the lead of impacted people who are the experts of their lived experiences and best positioned to articulate our demands and set our collective vision of a world with human rights fulfilled. Our guests are listed in the chat. Thank you, Nico, in the order they will appear, and will each speak for two minutes, leaving time at the end for questions. In addition to our speakers, we are joined by advocates representing co-sponsoring organizations, including Dr. Vicky Casanova-Willis, Jamil Dakwar, Crystal Noel, and Chrissy Roth, who will also be available for questions. And finally, this briefing is being recorded, though we are also happy to pause the recording for questions, so just let me know in the chat. And as missions join, please feel free to let us know where you are calling from. We are grateful that you're here. And with that, I am honored to welcome our first speaker, Cephas, Uncle Bobby X Johnson, the uncle of Oscar Grant. Thank you, Uncle Bobby.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I am affectionately known to the community as Uncle Bobby. I am the uncle of Oscar Grant. Oscar Grant, if many of you may not know or do know, is the young man that was killed at the Fruitvale BART station on January 1st, 2009 in Oakland, California. And as a result of that murder, the acclaimed movie Fruitvale Station was produced. And that represented basically a day in Oscar's life, but not so much the traumatic experience that happened on that platform when it came to him being murdered. I am first honored to be able to participate in this, and I just thank all of you for allowing me to have a few words in this space and time. In 2015, I participated in the United Nations Working Group of African People of African Descent, I believe it was called. And I also had set up the Zoom meeting that took place with the delegation at Merritt College in Oakland, California. The delegation wasn't able to come physically to Oakland, but they did Zoom in and spoke to the students as well as our family and other families that was at that meeting. And I do know as a result of that, it was stated that the contemporary policing or police killings in the trauma created this racial terror that we are experiencing, similar to that of when lynching was taking place. I think what's important today for me to talk about is what happened on that platform a little to what we hope can be a result of this that is occurring today. Of course, Oscar was murdered on that platform by Johannes Mesley. And of course, he was charged and only served 11 months. The criminal justice system actually protected him from actually serving the prison time that he was supposed to serve. The district attorney here in Alameda County just reopened our case after 11 years. And the reason why they had to reopen the case is because it was stated then that they wanted to pursue charges against Tony Peroni for the murder of Oscar Grant. And the district attorney had, Nancy O'Malley, stated that Alameda County had ran out of money and was unable to prosecute Tony Peroni at that time due to the cost of running back and forth to LA. Since they have opened our case, it's our hope that we can draw national attention to how the system in many ways protect officers that create these harms. The Myers-Nave report investigation that took place behind the murder of Oscar Grant states clearly in writing that Tony Peroni is the reason why Oscar is dead. He punched Oscar, he kneed Oscar in the face, he called Oscar excuse the language, a bitch ass nigga 3 times. He put his knee on Oscar's neck, the same knee that was on George Floyd's neck, he also had on Oscar's neck. And he was pushing Oscar's face through the concrete floor, cracking the bones in Oscar's face, and Oscar's pleading he can't breathe. Of course, if Johannes Mesley would not have stood up and shot Oscar in the back because he thought that Oscar had a weapon, Oscar probably would have died under the knee of Tony Peroni at that time.
Thank you.
Now the district attorney is filing charges against Tony Peroni, or at least doing an investigation on Tony Peroni. But I'll say this, I'm not sure how much time I have left.
The time is up, unfortunately, but we want to also make sure that we share everything that's happening in the case, and we can share that with the missions as well.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much, Uncle Bobby. Appreciate you. I'm grateful, and holding Oscar Grant in his memory.
Yes.
I want to invite Mrs. Mary L. Johnson to speak, a mother of Chicago police torture survivor Michael Johnson, who is still incarcerated. So Mrs. Mary Johnson, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You're on mute, Mrs. Mary Johnson.
I'm on mute now.
You're perfect. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm Mary Johnson. I'm the mother of Michael Johnson. And when I announced my son, I introduced us as a couple. We're both serving life sentences. My son was wrongfully convicted and brutalized. Actually, I filed my first complaint against police brutality in 1970. And that was when I assumed that I had rights and that I was an American citizen. I had no experience with the police or court. The only lawyer I was familiar with was Perry Mason. And the only police detective I knew about was Colombo. So when my son was brutalized, I went to 11th Street to report it. And that started his criminal career. Before then, he had never been to a police station, and I had never been there. Actually, the police was officer friendly to my children. That's what I raised them to believe. And the thing about it, I compared the police with Jesus and Santa Claus. They was all white and they was all good. But if you was bad, they had a right to abuse you, and there was nothing you could do about it. You couldn't tell nobody, and you couldn't get no relief from it. My son spent 15 years in TAM's Supermax. That was supposed to be a dehumanizing, unjust experience for any human being. They finally closed the place. You wasn't supposed to stay there for over a year, but he spent from 1998 to 2012 in Tam Supermax. I traveled 7 hours to see him for that length of time. The whole visit was dehumanizing. And that's the sad part about this system. They don't just punish the person that they arrest. The whole family suffers. His children suffered. I suffered. The neighbors who were familiar with him suffered. It's a thing that's so sad, it's so sickening till they call themselves say making up for it by giving you reparations. How can you give me reparations for the time I spent in the nursing homes, unable to even function mentally? I had 3 nervous breakdowns. I had to stop working on my job. I'm still suffering from the fact that my son is wrongfully convicted. And everywhere I go for help, I find out most of the people I go to for help, they are just as scared of the police as I am. But you aren't aware of that until you go through it. I I I I just can barely stand to talk about the situation. I just want people to know that the people that have been brutalized by the police, if they would stand up, you'd find very few people sitting.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Mary Johnson, for bringing in families and for carrying on the legacy of your son so beautifully. Thank you for being here. I'm going to ask Mrs. Bertha Escamilla, mother as well of a Chicago police torture survivor, Nick Escamilla, to speak. Thank you. Dr. Vicky, do you see Bertha?
I do not at the moment, and I thought I did. Can you, if she needs to chime in?
She's there. She's
Okay.
on. She
I
just
thought
needs
she
to
was.
take her phone. Yeah,
Can
she
you
just
take it off mute, Ms. Bertha?
yeah.
Perfect. Got you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. My name is Bertha Escamilla, and my son, Nick Escamilla, is innocent. He served 14 and a half years for a murder that he did not know anything of. For a murder in 1993 that he knew nothing about. I dedicated my life to get justice for him and all other police torture survivors. Nick was threatened, beat up, tortured, and told if he didn't cooperate that they would take his pregnant wife and put her in jail and take away his 2-year-old daughter and take her to CFS. My son is finally home, thank God, but there are so many innocent men and women who are serving time. We mothers serve time and suffer along with their pain. Many of mothers suffer mental and physical illness, like our innocent incarcerated and tortured children. More police torture survivors are Latino and Black. We call ourselves mothers of kidnapped. We have an organization called Mamas that support us, and they help us get our stories out to try to get justice for our loved ones. We also have another group, it's called the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. We are fighting to get community control. We are demanding Governor Pritzker to pardon all police torture victims. Our loved ones are sick and are dying in the prisons because of the coronavirus. And we need for them to get out. We need them to come home. Our children were taken advantage of, tortured, beat up, and threatened, but that does not stop there. there are corrupted prosecutors and judges who have as many as 25 reversal cases, like Judge Kenneth Wallace, who are demanding, we are demanding that they are held accountable and punished. What kind of justice is this, that we don't have any justice? But now we're supposed to have judges with prosecutors and judges and police officers. They are all corrupt. We need to replace each and every one of them to finally get justice. But most of all, number one, we need all torture survivors to be freed.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Escamilla. Grateful for you and for that, for giving us the breadth of the criminal legal system as well. I am happy that Frank Chapman is here from the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Frank.
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay, I know you can't see me because I can't see me.
We hear you.
Okay, good. Well, I'm so honored to be a part of this program that you're having here, this international forum of the United Nations. And I'm also honored to be on with Mary L. Johnson and Bertha.
It's a little hard to hear you, Frank, if you can get closer to the mic.
Okay, let me try to turn it up. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, I'm really honored to be here in this forum, and I'm also honored to be here with Mary L. Johnson and Bertha Escamilla, who were the fuel of our movement here in Chicago. Police practice in the United States support an elaborately designed system of legal lynching based on torture, false imprisonment.
Frank, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm going to ask you to get a little bit closer again. You were great, and then we lost you. You're a bit muffled.
How about now?
I think so. Closer would be better.
Is that great again?
Yeah, go for it.
It's a brand new computer too. I don't understand this. But anyway, I would say that the police practice in the United States are part of an elaborately designed system of legal lynching based on torture, false imprisonment, murder, slavery, genocide, and apartheid. In Chicago, the third largest city in the U.S., we are first in torturing innocent people and state-sanctioned police violence. We live in the only state, Illinois, that has legislatively created a commission on torture. And we live in the only city that has passed legislation for reparations for violence of police torture. And where two mayors have apologized to the torture survivors. Of course, the apology means nothing. People still in jail and still being tortured. Most of the people tortured and forced to confess the homicides they did not do were Black. Yet over 75% of the homicides in the Black communities remain unsolved. This is indicative of the fact that police crimes are related to all crimes. In Chicago, we have successfully built the most massive movement in the United States for community control of police because we work in organizing those communities most impacted by police crimes of torture and murder. Our proposed city ordinance for an already elected civilian police accountability council has the support of hundreds of thousands of Chicago residents and citizens, 19 members of the city council, an organization including Black Lives Matter, United Working Families, National Council of Black Lawyers, Chicago Teachers Union, Service Employees International, Local 73, Trinity United Church of Christ, and over 100 community-based organizations. We will win this struggle, but with the help of the international community, we will win it soon. Did you hear all that?
So we heard portions of that brilliance, and we will make sure to send it. And we will share your statement after the briefing fully. But we had a sense of the extraordinary work you all are doing in Chicago. So thank you so much, Frank.
Not a problem.
And now Larry Settle.
Gotcha. Can you hear me? Gotcha. So thank you for having me. Good morning. My name is Larry Settle. I just wanted to share a letter with you all that I wrote last night for my dad, Derek Suttle. Dear Pops, there's never a day in my life where I don't think about you. It's been 3,179 days since your death. I miss you, I love you, and I wish you were still here. Growing up, you called me Daddy's Rock because you said I was strong like a rock, which may be true, but the more time that passes without you, I think there's so much more to that truth. Truth is, I'm deeper into myself and closer to God more than I've ever been. I never knew I was as strong as you or others said I was until life showed me circumstances that made me feel like that's the only choice I had of being. For years, I've been in survival mode. In recent days, I just want to thank you and always celebrate your life for always sharing and showing me the beautiful parts of this strange life. I truly believe many of my life experiences have shaped my interest and encompassed work involving a number of cultural, social, and political backgrounds, which have all impacted my life as well as a number of other people within our society. For instance, when I was 8 months old, DCFS removed my 3 older siblings and I from my biological mother's custody. My siblings and I came into the attention of DCFS because during weekly visits to my paternal grandmother's home, she would notice and report the signs of abuse, neglect, and abnormal behavior from my biological mother to DCFS. My grandmother strongly believed it was in the best interest of my siblings and I to be removed from my mother's custody. Thus, my siblings and I were adopted by my paternal grandparents. I would describe my paternal grandmother as a person with deep passion for education. In fact, she was a former educator, a former juvenile probation officer in the Dependent and Neglect Division, and retired Chicago police agent. My grandmother taught me at a very young age to use all 5 of my senses when learning, which resulted in me being able to make countless connections, genuinely appreciating education, and developing excellent critical thinking skills, observation skills, communication skills, and leadership skills. My father, on the other hand, who lived with my grandmother and I, taught me a different set of life skills and lessons, which differ completely from my grandmother's values and beliefs. My father taught me that education was not always a classroom experience, and it was necessary for me to know other sides of life in order for me to fully understand the world we live in, because life is not always fair. In 2012, my father was murdered by an off-duty Black Chicago police officer, accompanied by his Black wife, down the street from our house 5 days before my 16th golden birthday. That inconsolable moment in my life has helped me realize that we all, as human beings or Americans, all have all kinds of rights and are obligated to be treated fairly, but sometimes don't. There's always a deep love and admiration towards my father, a parent figure, because to me, he had always maintained an upbeat, gallant, and selfless spirit towards not just members of our family, but everyone in the South Shore community, despite his given circumstances. For instance, even though my father battled with drug addiction and spent time in and out of jail, his lifestyle motivated me to set high goals for myself and strive to be the best in whatever I did. So I will always celebrate and remember the life of my father. And I just want to share that with you all this morning. So thank you for having me.
Debbie, thank you so much. And to get an insight into what an extraordinary man your father was. Thank you. And now inviting Monica James, the founder of Triumphant Together. So grateful you're here, Monica.
Thank you. Good evening, good morning, good evening. My name's Monica James, and I am a survivor of police brutality, mass incarceration, and sexual violence. Since 1990, I have been targeted by CPD for walking as a Black trans woman. I have been viciously criminalized for being a Black trans woman and maliciously prosecuted for that. In the process of my incarceration by CPD, I was brutally beaten and charged and convicted for aggravated battery of the police officer. This set the tone for the rest of my life. Any police encounters from then on would be considered punishable by state time. And on top of that, I have been denied access to gainful employment, education, housing, due to the collateral consequences of being a formerly incarcerated individual. My recommendations for the United States: one, less interactions between police and civilians for minor infractions. I believe in a ticketing process. Second, I believe that the universal state and federal laws should be revised that allow felony convictions to be an impediment or a hindrance to a person's ability to gain employment, housing, and education. And my recommendation is that the state and federal laws would adopt laws and policies that ban chokeholds, anything that asphyxiates a person's ability to breathe. And I truly, truly am sympathetic for everyone on this call who have experienced these types of loss and interactions. You only understand these interactions by living them. And Mary Johnson, Mrs. Mary L. Johnson, my heart goes out to you, and I'm so grateful to be in this fight. And as I continue to navigate this journey, I will lift up you in your fight, and I will reflect upon that and how to continue pressing this fight forward. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Monica James. We're now turning to a section looking at excessive sentencing, and I'm going to ask Chris Henderson, the Executive Director of the Amistad Law Project, to kick us off. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Henderson, the Executive Director of Amistad Law Project, which is based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm here to give you some context and information about the United States practices of condemning people, disproportionately people of African descent, to the death penalty and life without parole, or death by incarceration. The reason we use this language, death by incarceration, is that this sentence, like the death penalty, ends only with death. A life without parole sentence in the United States literally means that there is no mechanism for that person to be released from prison. In the United States, over 50,000 people are currently serving death by incarceration. When we add in people serving life with parole sentences and people serving virtual life sentences, we're looking at over 200,000 people in the United States. About half of the people serving death by incarceration in the United States are Black, despite Black people making up only 13% of the population. In Pennsylvania, almost 2/3 of people serving death by incarceration are Black. If incarceration and harsh sentencing worked, we would have the safest nation on earth, but we know that's not the case. We need resources for the things that make our communities stronger. Then we will have more safety. Instead of responding to harm and violence, we need to get at the root causes and make sure we all have what we need. Communities of African descent in the United States often have poorer schools, less food access, and have higher rates of poverty. These circumstances make violence much more likely. Marie Michi Scott is one of our clients, and she's serving a death by incarceration sentence for her part in a robbery that tragically ended in homicide. She has been incarcerated since she was 19. She's now 67 years old. Next, you'll hear a recording of her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Let's send folks able to see the screen.
My name is Marie Scott, and I'm a plaintiff in this lawsuit. I'm a 67-year-old woman who has served almost a half a century in prison. I'm guilty of my crime, and nothing can punish me more than I've punished myself for what I've done. Somewhere back in time, while serving my life sentence, I met a woman by the name of Peachy, Sharon Wiggins, who explained to me that a life sentence meant death in this Commonwealth. In other words, you are sentenced to a life sentence that you must live out until you die. The more I served what felt like death by incarceration, the more I wondered, how could such a draconian penalty be handed down to those of us with the conviction of second-degree felony murder, but who've neither killed anyone nor intended to kill? Clearly, in my mind, there had to be some room for a chance of redemption. Peachy went on to be the longest-serving juvenile lifer in the state. She carried the torch for all juveniles in this Commonwealth whose lives up until Miller versus Alabama were considered unredeemable, incorrigible, never ever to be fit for a second chance. Unfortunately, she died before seeing the triumphant victory of Miller versus Alabama through Montgomery versus Louisiana. I feel it's time for me to pick up that torch with this lawsuit that's being filed for those of us who've never killed or intended to kill. I would think that my hope for everyone who will be plaintiffs in this lawsuit will get a fair chance at redemption. And I would hope that in doing so, they would be able to give back by their behavior in being productive citizens in the street and trying to help society cure the ills that we created when we came.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Michi. I will now turn to Jamil Dakwar, my colleague from the ACLU, to share a video on probation and parole. 3 minutes. Thanks, Jamil.
Violated my probation, and they got another 2 years of probation on top of that. Since then, the cops have arrested me multiple times. Each time the courts dismissed the charges, but the judge kept sentencing me to more probation. Right now, I'm 39 years old, and I'm still serving the same probation sentence from when I was 18. I've been on probation pretty much half my life.
Probation and parole are marketed as alternatives to incarceration that help people get back on their feet. But in reality, these forms of supervision are feeding mass incarceration. Many people on probation and parole will end up in jail or prison for breaking the rules of their supervision, rules that can set people up to fail. Given decades of systemic discrimination, people of color are disproportionately under supervision and face harsh sentences for minor slip-ups.
These days I'm working at a job. I have full custody of my daughter. Things are coming together, but there's always a possibility you end up going back to jail when you're on probation. For someone that's never been on probation, there's a lot of anxiety. It can deter you from getting certain jobs. The companies can say, oh, you're gonna be missing days because you have to go see your probation officer. No real freedom even right now. You think you're getting a deal when you're on probation, but then you realize it isn't really helping you.
Millions of people are left to navigate supervision systems in the U.S. that are practically insurmountable without money, reliable transportation, stable housing, and access to health services.
I served 3 years in prison for robbery, and when I got out of parole, I published a book. I started working at Mothers in Charge. I was still serving my 10-year probation term when I fell into a hardship with money, and I missed a $270 payment in supervision fees. I got a letter in the mail that said if I didn't pay, I could face electronic monitoring or be placed in a halfway house. For missing money, you could possibly go back to jail or wear an ankle monitor. Your chances of getting employment with an ankle monitor on aren't good. I'm an example of you can be doing absolutely the right thing on a daily basis, and still probation and parole have you in their clutches by threatening you with reincarceration if you don't have money.
In America today, 4.5 million people on probation and parole. This thing that was invented to help people acclimate to society and turn their lives around has now become overly focused on surveillance and a tripwire back into incarceration. And we need to have way less of it, and what we do have of it needs to be shorter. less focused on technical violations and more focused on services, supports, and opportunities that are going to help people turn their lives around.
Thank you, Jamil. We're now turning to a segment on prison conditions and detention, and I'm going to call on Angel Sanchez, who is offering a statement from Gustavo Guerra, a person serving life sentence in the Everglades Correctional Institution in Florida. Thank you so much, Angel.
Thank you for having me. My name is Angel Sanchez. I was incarcerated in and out of the juvenile system since I was at the age of 13. I was tried as an adult at 14 and sent to state prison at 16 with a 30-year sentence and a 9th grade education. Fortunately for me, I was able to have some of my sentences vacated, and I was released after serving 12 years. I find it my responsibility and duty to be voting for those that are still incarcerated and giving voice to them. So that's what I'll be doing today. A colleague and I will be sharing some excerpted text from works submitted to from incarcerated people across the US to Exchange for Change, a prison writing education program for possible publication in a volume documenting the experiences of incarceration during COVID-19's pandemic. We will send you the full text and the communication to follow this briefing. At this point, I will ask you to forget my name and bring to mind Gustavo Guerra, who's in prison in Everglades Correction in Miami, Florida, and I will be sharing his words as testimony from his piece, Stainless Resolve.
Gustavo, you're on mute. I'm sorry if you can unmute.
I'm sorry, thank you. It's count time. That means I am locked in my cell as security walks around and makes sure we are all still here. It is late evening and it's hot. Humidity is in the upper 80s. In the past, I'd used this time, hour intervals throughout the day, to either finish some classwork or catch up on a book. Since the virus, however, I have been doing a lot more staring. It has been over a month since our quarantine began. That means no classes, no rec yard, no chapel, no programs, no library, nothing for me to do in my cell during count time. Well, that is not exactly true because I can stew, reminisce, regret, resent. I can dream and hope and wish, but in the end, all of my fanciful desires fade away as a stainless toilet drags me back to the reality of my natural life sentence. So what dreams does a lifer have? You know, the regular ones. Eating a medium rare steak with an ice cold beer, waking up in a pillow top mattress, but that's just the surface. I also dream of standing on a stage telling people about my redemption and about those still behind the wire. I dream of mentoring at-risk youth and showing them a different way. Then I focus on the toilet and the sink right next to it, and those dreams disperse behind my reality, streaming down my face as I come to terms with the fact that I probably would never be released from prison. In Florida, life means life. All of my achievements mean nothing. My certificates, my newsletter articles and published pieces, my upcoming TED Talk, my program participation, my facilitating, it means nothing. I will one day die alone in a prison infirmary as some anonymous inmates change my sheets. My bipolar heart mourns for the pain I have caused the victims of my crime and yet longs for the freedom beyond the wire. The freedom to live and love and work and build and help my fellow man. The freedom to live my life honoring the debts I have to the victims and society by doing my part to make this world a better place. It is purpose. I live my life as I would out there, waiting for the day society realizes that my redemption and rehabilitation are possible. Waiting for them to act, waiting for a chance to serve, not my sentence, my community. Those are the words of Gustavo Guerra right now, and my colleague will read another piece.
Thank you. Yes, Mina Jagannath, Exchange for Change, reading from Bob Russell Williams Jr. Mina, thank you.
It's my deep honor to bring to you the words of Bob R. Williams Jr., who is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison. It's rather sad and pretty enlightening being on death row. I mean, every day you wake up and you know exactly what your reality is. Regardless if it will happen or not, the cold hard facts, at least for me, is that they're going to kill me one day. They're going to take me to a funky room, strap me to a bed, stick needles into my arm, and then after opening a viewing curtain so people can watch, they're going to pump 5 to 7 grams of liquid fire into my body until I'm graveyard dead. Now, most folks see home as a place. I don't. Home to me is people. It's where you see those around you reflected in yourself and yourself reflected in those around you. I've been here at San Quentin since late 1996. Got here when I was just 20 years old. This place will never be my home, but it's become a sort of home nonetheless. COVID came into my home and left with a few of my friends and associates. Sadly, it took the following men. Richard Steitley, an old fella with a bit of Texas in his talk. Johnny Avila from around Fresno, spent years in the yard with him. Manuel Alvarez, big old cat from Cuba. Dwayne Carey, a good brother from around LA Way. Joseph Cordova, Troy Ashmus, Jeffrey Hawkins, John Beams, David Reed, Scott Erskine, Lonnie Franklin, John Abel, and Thomas Potts. All these men and maybe more were taken from us prematurely by a microscopic virus they couldn't even see to go to battle against. In their own ways, they will be remembered and missed. See, these men all came here for whatever it was they came here for. And after many years and a whole lot of thought, I've come to realize that whatever it is, or whatever it was that a man may have done, didn't do, or left undone in his past life before coming to prison and or death row, no longer matters in the same way. Think about this. I mean, if you once got caught cheating on a test at school, would you like to be known as a cheater for the rest of your life, even if you never once did it again? Most people recoil at that and pretty vociferously think, heck no. Well, these guys came here and, it is my most fervent belief, changed. They grew up and matured, they evolved, and they found some sort of redemption and rehabilitation that made them into better men, human beings, children of God, and just plain old decent fellows. So it became or becomes not about whatever you did, didn't do, and left undone, but about what you do with it, how you honor it in a good and higher way, how you learn from it all and share that learning. I, for one, just have to believe that these men, friends of a sort, even family members in some convoluted way, touch the lives of the men in here and lives out here. May these men all rest in peace, fly with the angels, and pop up in our minds now and then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. And thank you to Bob. I'm pleased that Alonso Cisneros is with us from First Defense Legal Aid. Alonso, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alonso Cisneros, and I'm here on behalf of First Defense Legal Aid in Chicago. I'm here to speak on how incommunicado detention and interrogation remain routine Chicago police procedures. The October 1st Chicago lawyers' strike for Black lives saw lawyers and legal workers picketing outside of every police station to draw attention and support to those held incommunicado inside. Local policymakers have a solution that is being blocked by the mayor and police, so we urgently need your help. As a local watchdog of advocates and those personally impacted, First Defense Legal Aid has the following updates and asks of the United Nations to end this endemic torture. In 2018 and 19, over 98% of Chicago arrestees were held incommunicado and never got legal representation. They were alone with the police for the duration, only 2% could use the right to counsel, and it's no secret why it continues. Since 2016, the policy barrier has been known by all levels of responsible city government. No one is allowed to use the phones in police custody until the very end, if at all. In 2020, the majority of people charged with murder were never permitted to use a phone during their time under a custodial investigation with Chicago police. That's less than 2% who can get legal representation in CPD custody in the US, and 100% who are held incommunicado for hours or days disappeared from their families. Since we last reported to the Committee on Incommunicado Detention that same year, the city government has obstructed a solution. Incommunicado detention impacts almost every Chicagoan under arrest, including children and the mentally ill, and almost all victims are of African and Native American descent. And we still don't have data for 2020. The police are hiding the documentation on how many arrests and attorney visits, so we can't even compare any progress, unfortunately. Using last year's data to estimate, Chicago police are holding approximately 250 people incommunicado across the city as we speak, putting our people at risk of further human rights violations. Please help expose and implore our police to cease this human rights violation. Hashtag close Homeland Square and all CPD Black sites. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alonso. And feel free to drop those hashtags in the chat. We'd love to follow that. Thank you. And now Daniel Nuoke, I believe I see you speaking on immigration, detention, deportations. Daniel, please unmute Daniel and.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Nwoke, and I'm a post-detainee myself. I'm a medical student currently rounding up my training as a physician here in Chicago. I was detained in 2017 from the airport, and I was taken to Kenosha County Detention Center in Wisconsin. And I'm speaking up today on the impacts of detention and the negative effects it has on the detainees. Because the detention system itself is structured in such a way to frustrate you, intimidate you, and make the detainee or the immigrant vulnerable to situations that make you get to a situation whereby you have no other choice than to sign a voluntary deportation. I myself in particular, for 3 weeks after I got detained, I was not able to communicate my family. No one knew where I was. And it was so difficult for my parents because they themselves, in particular, were expecting me to at least be deported back to my home country. I wasn't there, and I was not here in the US. So for my mom, it was a period of anxiety, and she ended up coming down with serious blood pressure, and which threatened her life. And for me, while in detention, I felt so sick to the point that everyone was expecting that I might not make it. I pleaded several times to be taken to the hospital. And for 3 months, they couldn't grant that request. But finally, they were able to take me to the hospital. And the most annoying part of that was I was taken to the hospital. The same hospitals that I was supposed to serve as a medical student was where I was taken to. And I had to be taken there in handcuffs and chains, dressed in a jail clothes to the hospital, which was very, very humiliating. And detention also denies the detainees, especially Africans and other migrants, the access to legal aid. Because when you're kept in detention, you have no or bare or minimal access to lawyers. So you have no chance to even stand in immigration court. And as such, you lose your case and you get deported. And being in detention itself is an opportunity for for ICE to be able to transfer you at their will and distract whatever plans or moves you are making in order to at least get freedom. And also, it's difficult for when, after you've come out from detention, to readjust. Because again, for me personally, it took me almost 4 months to readjust back to life, get back to school, get to know what is going on. And psychologically, it was very, very difficult for me. So detention experience is one thing I'm believing that ICE on its own can actually be cut down, because there are actually alternatives to detention rather than having to send people to spend months or years of their life, because there have been people who have actually spent 2 years, 3 years, 4 years while in detention without any crime that is just aside immigration problems because they are waiting on appeal dates. And now I hear that the appeal dates are like a year apart. And most times people have to spend a chunk of their life just knowing what to do. And at the end of the day, you still get deported back. And most of these people are deported back to where they are fearing, because most of migrants are seeking asylum. And when you deport them after detention, you deport them back to their fears. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for also sharing the breadth of the carceral society in the United States, from prisons to immigrant detention. Our final 2 speakers are going to speak about political prisoners. Thank you all so much for staying with us for this important event. And I'm so honored to welcome Jihad Abdulmumid through the virtual stage. representing the National Jericho Movement. Thank you, Jihad.
You're welcome, sister. Again, greetings of peace to everyone. My name is Jihad Abdul Mumit. I am currently the chairperson of the National Jericho Movement to free all political prisoners in the United States. I have served, or I should say I did 23 years on a 43-year sentence for bank robberies related to the Black Panther Party and the Civil Rights era Black Liberation Movement. We are here today to accentuate, to acknowledge the fact that the United States of America does indeed have political prisoners. And a lot of times we, even ourselves as activists, we kind of overlook the fact that we have freedom fighters. So I want you to just picture yourself opening up a history book. And when you see a picture of Nat Turner or Gabriel Prosser or Denmark Vesey or John Brown or Frederick Douglass or the Maroons, do you see a hero or do you see a criminal? Do you see freedom fighters in our own struggle against oppression and systemic and historic racial oppression and police violence? And how should we address that? So we're asking that this committee, this commission, the viewers of these testimonies recognize the fact that we as a human right have a right to stand up and resist and fight against our oppression. When Black people do that, a lot of times we are judged, we are feared, and we look through the same lens of the slave master, the maintainers of this status quo. And we use the same system of judging our actions that we look at as being racist, as all the testimonies before us has proven to be. So we're saying for this commission, for this committee, for ourselves, for our activists to demand that the United States government review the fact that it has political prisoners, that we have put forth since 2010 through the Universal Periodic Review, the same issue of political prisoners in the United States, which, by the way, is the only country in the world that falsely deceives the world that there is no political prison, because facetiously speaking, everything is peachy crunch and cool in a place called the United States. We have no protests in the street. There are no George Floyds. There are unknown murders of millions of thousands of slaves. There's no Breonna Taylors. There's nothing like that. And there are no people that fight against these positions. So I'm being facetious to make the point, and you do understand that point. I'm sure you do. And we need more freedom fighters. So here's what we're asking to do, that this commission and that we demand that the government review the findings of the 1976 Frank Church hearings that pinned the government's counterintelligence program to falsify information and evidence and create and foment the conditions that freedom fighters are languishing in prison now, which there are dozens and dozens and dozens, that's up to 40 and 50 years in prison. That we investigate the torture and the continued parole denials of these freedom fighters, and that we establish a semblance of a truth and reconciliation commission of sorts that we can put this in also not only in the legal court, but in the court of public opinion, where we can have educators and people from our own community and clerics and activists and fathers and mothers and impacted victims to demand the release and vet out the cases of these people, of these individuals, so that they can come home. Because if we don't do this, and I'll close on this point, then those activists from the Black Lives Matter movement today that get arrested for throwing a Molotov cocktail, for burning something, for slicing a tire, and they're in jail 10, 15 years from now, the government that we are showing all these egregious oppressive actions, they know for a fact that we won't support our own, and we will leave them there. We will forget about them, and our struggle will always be superficial. On that, I'll end as I began. Peace.
Thank you, Jihad. Here's to the righteous resistance of an intolerable status quo. Thank you. And our last speaker today, Robert Salim Holbrook, the Executive Director of the Abolitionist Law Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to address an issue of paramount importance, and that is political prisoners in the United States. My name is Robert Salim Holbrook, and I am the Executive Director of the Abolitionist Law Center in Pennsylvania. I am also a former child offender who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in the United States and served 27 years in prison before being released in 2018. The Periodic Review Council played a pivotal role in my release when it ruled in 2007 that the United States practice of sentencing children to life without parole amounted to torture and cruel and degrading treatment. This helped pave the way for the U.S. Supreme Court to end mandatory life without parole sentences for children in the United States in 2012 in the case of Miller versus Alabama. This summer, the world watched as the United States was in the throes of a national uprising led by citizens of African descent over the continued practice of state violence as manifested in the extrajudicial killings of people of African descent by police. This summer's uprising continues a frequent and recurring pattern within U.S. history in which a new generation of Black people are summoned to the streets to demand that our human rights are respected and the state is held accountable for the harm it has done to our citizens. As new generations take to the streets today, dozens of political prisoners languish in United States prisons who are serving death by incarceration sentences for rising up to the challenge of police and state violence during their generation, during the civil rights and Black power uprisings in the United States over 50 years ago. In Pennsylvania, Russell Maroon Schultz has been incarcerated since 1971. Fred Muhammad Burton has been incarcerated since 1972. Joseph Jojo Bowens has been incarcerated since 1970. Mumia Abu Jamal has been incarcerated since 1980. These men, former members of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, have been in prison for over 50 years. The fact that their continued incarceration and during the time of their incarceration, police and state violence against descendants of African people in the United States continues to be an epidemic. It gives validation to the injustice of their continued incarceration. The time is now to act to free these political prisoners who are on their last days and who deserve to go home and spend their last days with dignity with their families. As someone who was nurtured by these prisoners when I was a child in the prison system, I am here today to strongly urge the adoption of the recommendations submitted by the National Jericho Movement to Free All Political Prisoners and the United States Human Rights Network, People of African Descent Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salim. What a gift to hear you all. We are nearing the end of our time and there may not be time for question and answer, but I just want to assure that we will send this recording to UN missions. We will follow up with information and specific demands. And again, we are looking for explicit attention, lifting up names, lifting up issues, policing, excessive sentencing, prison conditions, political prisoners. We're calling on the international community for vigilance. This is the time in this moment of reckoning and mass uprising against systemic anti-Black racism. This is your obligation, and we are so honored to have spent this time together. Thank you again for our colleagues and comrades who shared their testimony. And if the missions have any questions or requests for meetings with the groups and the speakers that you've heard today, please feel free to follow up with us and we'll get you in touch. Thank you again so much. Wishing you a blessed day, and until soon, I'll take care. Thank you.